She slid the shop keys across the counter toward me, the way you hand somebody a gift they already paid for. Open at 6. Lock at 7. How? Family doesn't send invoices. 9 years. I ran that building. 9 years. And not one paycheck with my name printed on it. Here is what she did not know. I had found out the day before. My name was already sitting on a $60,000 line of credit at a bank I had never walked into. I left that morning with a blue notebook and $41 in my coat pocket. Today, I check other people's hours for a living. I am a payroll compliance auditor, which is a long way of saying I find the hours somebody worked and somebody else erased. Last winter, I finally audited my own. My name is Delia Hart. I am 34 years old. And if you have ever been the one everybody in your family counted on, and nobody in your family counted, stay with me, because the cheapest object in that building was a clock bolted to the wall. And it was the only thing in there that ever told me the truth. I want to take you back 11 years before that morning. I was 17. It was the middle of my senior year, and my father died in the parking lot of a hardware store, with a coil of copper pipe still in his cart. Hart. Fast. The man fixed furnaces for a living in a town where winter is a personality, and he went in the second week of January, which meant the phone at the shop did not stop lighting up for the entire week. We were burying him. Somebody had to answer it. That somebody was me. I do not want to make my mother a monster in the first 5 minutes, because she was not one, and because a monster is easy to leave. Patrice Hart was worse than a monster. She was reasonable. She sat me down at the kitchen table 4 days after the funeral, with the good tablecloth still on it, and she held both my hands, and she said the sentence I would hear roughly 2,000 more times before I stopped counting. Family doesn't send invoices. She meant it as comfort. That is the part that took me years to understand. She was telling me that in this house, nobody keeps a tally. Nobody bills anybody. We just carry what needs carrying. It sounded like love. It functioned like a lock. I answered the shop phone. Through the spring, I took the calls, wrote the addresses on a legal pad, dispatched my father's 2 technicians, and learned to say the words furnaces and heat exchanger, like I knew what they meant. I graduated in a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax, and my mother left before the last name was called, because a customer in the North End had no hot water. Here is the first thing I want you to notice, because it comes back. Nobody ever asked me to do it. Not once. There was never a request I could have refused. There was only ever a situation, and I was the only person standing in it. That is how these things work. If you have ever tried to explain to a friend why you couldn't just say no, and watch their face go blank, you know exactly what I mean. There was never a no available. There was just a phone that was going to be answered by me, or by nobody. For 2 years, I did it part-time. I took classes at the community college in the mornings, and I was at the shop by noon. I liked the work more than I ever admitted out loud. I liked knowing which streets flooded, which landlords paid late, which old woman on Sycamore would offer you a butterscotch candy from a dish by the door and be insulted if you refused. Then, I turned 19, and my mother restructured my life in a single conversation that took under 4 minutes. The bookkeeper quit, that was all. A woman named in the company records only as the bookkeeper, who I will keep calling that, because I want you to be able to hold every name in this story in your head without effort. She quit in August, and my mother came into the back office, where I was eating a sandwich over a stack of service tickets, and told me she had already dropped my fall classes. She had my student portal password. She had had it since I was 17 for financial aid, and I had never changed it. She had already withdrawn me before she told me. She said it the way you would mention you had picked up milk. I asked her why she had not asked me first. She looked genuinely puzzled, and this is the detail I have never been able to shake. Because I believe the puzzlement was real. She said, "We can't spare you, sweetheart." And then, she said the other thing. She said, "When this settles down, you'll be a partner in this. Your father would have wanted that. Stay with me here, because this is where the paperwork starts. And the paperwork is the whole story." That night, I did something small and strange that changed my entire life. 6 years later, I went to the drugstore on Route 9, and I bought a blue spiral notebook for $1.19, and I started writing down my hours. I want to be honest about why, because the honest reason is not noble. It was not a plan. It was not evidence gathering. I was 19 years old, and I had just had my education deleted by somebody who loved me, and I needed one column of numbers in my life. That was mine, and that was true. I wrote the date. I wrote the time. I unlocked the door. I wrote the time I locked it. Sometimes I wrote the weather, because the weather is why people call a heating company. 4:22 am. One time. Burst pipe on Delaware Avenue. I wrote it down. I liked the tidy columns. That is all it was. For 9 years. That is all it was. Now, let me climb forward, because the next rung is where I stopped being a daughter helping out and started being something with a job description that nobody would ever put in writing. My brother is 4 years older than me. Curtis. Curtis was not evil either, and I am going to keep being fair to these people, because fairness is the only weapon that ever worked. Curtis was weak in an ordinary, boring, extremely expensive way. He had left for a job in Cleveland the year our father died, and he came back 2 years later when it did not work out, and my mother received him like a returning general. He was good with customers. I will give him that permanently. He could stand in a widow's basement and explain a failed circuit board and make her feel taken care of. He was terrible with the parts of the business that happen at a desk, which was fine, because the parts of the business that happen at a desk were happening to me. By the time I was 24, I want you to understand exactly what I was doing, and I am going to state it plainly rather than dramatically. I opened the shop at 6 in the morning. I dispatched 3 technicians. I ordered parts and fought the supplier when they shorted us. I did the invoicing, the accounts receivable, the collections calls, the permit applications with the county, the scheduling, the payroll for the technicians, and the sales tax filing every quarter. I renewed the insurance. I answered the after-hours emergency line, which forwarded to my personal cell phone, because we could not justify the cost of a service. 50 hours a week was a slow week. Curtis was paid a salary. I found out the amount by accident, because I was the one who prepared the payroll, which is a sentence I would like you to sit with for a second. $62,000 a year. He also had a company truck and a fuel card. I had what my mother called the family account. It was a card in her name that I was allowed to carry for shop expenses. The day I understood the shape of my life, I was standing at a gas station on the corner of 4th and Vine at 7:50 a.m. in February, in a coat that had been my father's, buying $12 of gas for my own car, so I could drive to a job my mother had sent me on. I used the family account because I had $11 in my checking account, and 3 days until the technicians got paid. The card was declined, not expired. Declined. I stood in that little heated booth while the attendant, a kid who could not have been 19, ran it twice, and then looked at me with the specific face people make when they are trying to be kind about something humiliating. I called my mother from the parking lot. She was not angry, and she did not apologize, and she did not seem surprised. She said she had locked the card the previous week because Curtis had put a hotel on it, and she wanted to get to the bottom of that. And she had meant to tell me. Then, she said the second sentence. She said, "You can just cover it and we'll settle up." We never settled up. Not once. In 9 years. And I want to be precise about something. Because precision is the only thing that saved me. She was not lying. When she said it, she fully intended, in that moment, to settle up. She simply belonged to a category of person for whom intentions and events are the same substance. That was also the winter she had. The time clock installed. Business had grown. There were 5 technicians by then, and one of them had been rounding his hours in a creative direction. So my mother bought a punch clock from a restaurant supply outlet and had it bolted to the wall by the back door. Gray metal, about the size of a bread box, with a rack beside it holding a card for every employee. I remember standing in front of it the morning it went up, running my thumb along the little slots in the rack, reading the names. There was no card for me. I asked about it. I made a joke out of it, the way you do, and my mother laughed and put her hand flat on my back and said, "Oh, honey, you are not staff. You are family." 9 words. Say them out loud sometime and hear how much they sound like a compliment. I went into the back office and I opened the blue notebook and I wrote down my hours the way I had every day for 5 years. It did not feel like defiance. It felt like a hobby. That is how the best evidence in the world gets made, by the way. And I did not learn that for another decade. Nobody sits down to build a case. Somebody just needs one true column and keeps it. Remember the clock. Remember that there was no card in it with my name on it. We are going to come back to that clock at the very end of this story. And it is not going to mean what it means right now. 3 more years passed like that. I am going to skip them on purpose because they were the same year happening repeatedly, and because I promised you a story and not an inventory. Then, 14 months before the morning I left, a letter came to the shop that I opened by mistake. I say by mistake, but I opened every piece of mail that came to that building because I did the accounts. This one was from a bank in Columbus that we did not do business with. Our operating account was at a small regional bank 3 blocks from the shop, where the branch manager had known my father. The envelope was addressed to Delia Hart, Vice President, Hart Heating and Cooling, Incorporated. I stood in the back office and read it twice. It was not a bill. It was a routine annual notice about the terms on a business credit account. The kind of letter nobody reads. 2 paragraphs. A phone number. A reference number. Vice President. I brought it out front and held it up and asked my mother what it was. I want to describe her reaction carefully because it was a masterpiece and because I did not recognize it as one for another 14 months. She did not flinch. She did not glance at Curtis. She took the letter, looked at it for about 2 seconds, made a small amused sound, and said that the accountant had set some things up years ago for the corporation, and that officer titles are just shorthand on paperwork. They do not mean anything, and honestly, it was a mess, and she should really get it cleaned up. Then she handed the letter back to me. That is the part that worked. She handed it back. A guilty person takes the letter. She handed it back and told me to put it in the corporate folder. And I did. And I filed it. And I forgot it for 14 months. If you have ever been shown the truth and had it explained away by somebody whose voice you have trusted since you were an infant, comment trusted below, because I would like to know how many of us there are. I filed that letter with my own hands. I want you to remember that too. Now, we arrive at the morning. Everything in this story before this point was pointing at it, and everything after it moves away from it in a straight line. So I am going to slow down and give it to you minute by minute, because I have gone over these 90 minutes more times than I have gone over anything else in my life. I was 28. It was the 2nd week of March. And the reason it happened at all was that I had finally tried to do one ordinary thing for myself. I had found an apartment. 2 rooms over a dry cleaner on Harrison Street. $495 a month, with a radiator that worked and a window over the alley. I had been living in my mother's house my entire life. 28 years old, in the bedroom I was brought home to as an infant, with a heating and cooling company's entire administrative function running out of my personal cell phone. I had saved $1,100 over 3 years, in cash, in an envelope inside a boot in my closet, out of the small, irregular amounts my mother handed me when she remembered. Enough for first month and a deposit. I filled out the rental application. On a Tuesday afternoon, the landlord called me on Wednesday at 4:15 p.m. He was not unkind about it. He was a man in his 60s who owned 6 buildings and had heard everything. And he told me flatly that my application was denied and that he was telling me why, because most people would not. He said, "You've got a business credit line for $60,000 in your name, and it is drawn down to $58,400, and it is 90 days late." I said that was not possible. He said, "That is what it says." I stood in the back office of my father's shop at 4:15 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in March, holding a phone, looking at a wall calendar from a parts supplier with a photograph of a lake on it. And I did the thing that I think is the most human thing a person can do. I defended them, out loud, to a stranger. I said there must have been an error. My family owns a company. Our names are all over things. It is probably a mix-up. He said, "Sure, but I can't rent to it." That night, I did not sleep. I sat on my childhood bed with a laptop and pulled my own credit report, which I had never once looked at in 28 years of life. It took me 40 minutes to understand what I was reading, because I did not have the vocabulary yet. There was the credit line, opened 4 years earlier, guaranteed personally, which is the phrase that matters, and which means exactly what it sounds like. It means if the business does not pay it, the human being whose name is on it pays it, out of their wages, out of their bank account, for the rest of their life. If necessary, the human being was me. There was also a second thing I did not understand at all yet, which was a state tax lien filed against Hart Heating and Cooling, Incorporated, listing 2 responsible officers, my mother and me. I sat with that laptop until the room got gray and the birds started, and at 5:50 in the morning I got dressed, and I drove to the shop, and I opened it at 6, because that is what I did. I want you to understand that I opened the shop, even that morning. Muscle memory is stronger than betrayal, for about 90 minutes. My mother came in at 6:40 a.m. She always did. She parked in the space my father used to park in, and came through the back door past the punch clock, carrying a cardboard cup of coffee from the place on the corner. And she said good morning to me, and asked whether the technicians had been dispatched. I said I needed to ask her about a credit line. She set the coffee down on the counter, and took her coat off and hung it on the hook. She did all of that before she answered me. Then she said, "All right. Not what credit line. Not what are you talking about. All right." I said, "There is $60,000 in my name at a bank in Columbus, and I have never been in that building." She said, "Sit down, Delia." I did not sit down. I want that in the record. 28 years of sitting down when that woman said, "Sit down." And I stayed standing. And I have never been able to explain to anybody where that came from. And then she gave me the explanation, and I need you to hear it, because it is the most important speech in this story, and there is not one raised voice in it. She said the business needed the line 4 years ago, when the school district contract came through, because you have to buy the equipment before you get paid for the work. She said, The bank would not extend it on the corporation alone. She said Curtis could not go on it because of his divorce and a judgment against him. She said she could not go on it alone because of a bankruptcy in 1998, before I was born, that she had never told me about. She said, "So we used you, and it has never cost you a thing. It is the family's debt. It just has your name on it, the way the truck has my name on it, and you drive it." Then she said the sentence, "I want carved somewhere," she said, and honestly, "Sweetheart, it is the only thing you've ever had to put in." I asked about the tax lien. She said, "The accountant was handling it." I asked about vice president. She said, "You are the vice president. You've run this place since you were 19. I thought you'd be proud of that. And that is the trap closing. And it is beautiful work. And I want to name it plainly, so it does not get you the way it got me." She had taken the two things that were true, that I ran the company, and that the debt had not yet been collected from me, and used them to make the third thing sound reasonable, that she had signed my name onto a personal guarantee for $58,000 while I was answering her phones for free. I said, "I need to be taken off that line." She picked up her coffee. She said, "We'll look at it in the spring." And then she said, "Don't do anything stupid over this. You have no idea how thin things are right now." 7:15 a.m. The first technician came through the back door and put his card in the punch clock. He said, "Good morning to both of us." I said good morning back. My mother went into the front to open the register. I stood there and I looked at the rack of cards beside that clock, and there were 6 of them now, and none of them was mine. And I did the arithmetic on 9 years for the first time in my life. Standing up, in a coat that used to be my father's, I went into the back office. I took the blue notebook out of the bottom left drawer of the desk, where it had lived since I was 19. There were 4 of them by then, actually filled front to back, rubber banded together. And I want to be accurate, so I will say it once, and then call them the blue notebook for the rest of this, because that is what they became. I put them in a canvas bag. I took the corporate folder out of the filing cabinet, and I photographed every page in it with my phone, standing at the copier, in about 11 minutes. And then I put the folder back exactly where it had been. I did not take one document that was not mine. I want that on the record too, and you will see later exactly why it mattered. I took the shock keys off my keyring, the building key, the back door key, the key to the parts cage, the little one for the register. I put them on the counter, next to my mother's coffee. She came out of the front room while I was doing it, and she looked at the keys, and she looked at me, and she said, "What is this?" I said, "I am not coming in tomorrow." She said, "You are being dramatic. Who is going to answer the phone?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Delia, family doesn't send invoices." I said, "Okay, that was it. That was the whole confrontation." There was no shouting. Nobody threw anything. I walked out the back door at 7:40 a.m., past the punch clock, with a canvas bag of grocery store notebooks and $41. And I got in my car, and I drove past the gas station on 4th and Vine, and I got on the highway going south, and I made it about 19 miles before I had to pull onto the shoulder, because I could not see. That was the one time. I want to be clear about that, because there are people in this story who cried more than I did and got more sympathy for it. I cried once, alone, on the shoulder of a state highway, for about 6 minutes, in a parked car, at 8 in the morning. And then I wiped my face, and I drove to Columbus, and I did not cry again, for 6 years. 3 weeks after I left, I was working through a temporary staffing agency, and they sent me to a payroll office on the 4th floor of a building downtown. The job was called data entry. What it actually was keying in time cards for a company that ran 4 nursing homes, 1,100 employees, mostly women, mostly paid by the hour, mostly working shifts that did not start and end when the schedule said they did. The woman, 2 desks down from me, was named Alma. She was 58 years old. She had done payroll for 26 years. She kept a cardigan on the back of her chair year-round. And she ate lunch at 11:30 a.m. because she had raised 4 children on a schedule and never got over it. I did not tell her anything about myself for 2 months. I was not being mysterious. I was being ashamed. There is no dignified way to say I was 28 years old and had never been paid. What broke it was a woman named in the records only as employee 4192. And I never met her, and I have thought about her almost every week since. She was a nursing aide. Her time card came through with 40 hours flat, week after week, perfectly clean. And I noticed because clean is unusual. And underneath it, in the door badge log, which I had access to because it was part of the same system, her badge showed her entering the building at 6:40 in the morning and leaving at 7:30 at night, 4 days a week. Somebody was rounding her. Somebody upstream of me was taking her card and making it tidy. I flagged it. I did it wrong, actually. I flagged it in an email to a supervisor who did not want it, and it went nowhere for a week. And I was a temp, and I was scared. Alma pulled her chair over to my desk on a Thursday afternoon and asked me to walk her through it. She looked at the badge log for a long time. Then, she asked me one question, and it was not about the aid. She asked, "Who taught you to notice that?" And I told her, all of it. In about 4 minutes, at a desk, with my hands flat on a keyboard, I told a woman I barely knew that I had run a company for 9 years without a paycheck, and that my mother had put my name on $60,000 of debt, and that I had a bag of grocery store notebooks in the trunk of my car because I did not know what else to do with them. Alma did not fix it. She did not offer me anything. She did not tell me it would be all right. And she did not tell me my mother loved me in her own way, which is the single most common thing people said to me in those years, and the most useless. She listened until I stopped talking. Then she said the line I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, "Honey, they can argue with you all day long. Nobody has ever won an argument with a date." Then she took her chair back to her own desk and finished her afternoon. And the next morning she walked my flag up to the compliance officer herself, over the supervisor, because she had 26 years, and I had 11 weeks. Employee 4192 got a check for $2,200 in back wages 8 months later, and I have no idea what she did with it, and it is still the best thing I have ever been part of. Now let me move fast, because the next 4 years were the least interesting and most important years of my life, and you already know I survived them. I rented a room from a retired school teacher for $300 a month. I was hired permanently by the payroll office at $17 an hour, and the first direct deposit that landed with my name on it was $709 and change. And I looked at it on my phone in a grocery store parking lot for a long time. I took the certification. It is called the Certified Payroll Professional Exam, which is a formal way of saying you are the person who proves the hours on paper match the hours a human being actually stood on a floor. I studied for it at a laminate table in a rented room, 4 nights a week, for 14 months. I failed the first attempt by 6 points. I passed the second. I learned words. That is the real story of those years. And I want to be honest about it, because from the outside it looked like nothing. I learned what a personal guarantee is. I learned what a statutory employee is. I learned what a responsible party is, which is the term the state uses for a person it can legally chase for a company's unpaid taxes, and which is what my mother had quietly made me when I was 24 years old. I learned that a business files 1 page every single year with the state, a form called an annual report, which does nothing except tell the government who is running the company and who is signing for it. 1 page. Public. EU. public. Anybody can look at it for free. I had never looked at ours. In 9 years of running that company, it had never occurred to me that I could look up my own family. I moved into an apartment of my own with a radiator and a window over a parking lot, and I bought a used couch. And on some level, I thought that was the end of the story. I really did. For 2 years, I told myself I had gotten out, and out was enough, and the $60,000 in my name was a sleeping thing I should not wake. Here is what changed it. It was not courage. I want to be truthful about that. It was a form. 4.5 years after I left, I applied for a mortgage on a small house on the east side of Columbus. $94,000. 2 bedrooms, a garage that leaned, a maple tree in the front, and the loan officer, going through my file, asked me to explain a business credit line for $60,000 that I personally guaranteed, which was now charged off, which is the word a bank uses when it has given up on collecting a debt and written it off its own books as a loss. It does not mean the debt is gone. It means the debt is now permanent and sitting on your name like a scar. She also asked me about a state tax lien, listing me as a responsible officer for $81,000. I sat in that woman's office and I understood, finally, completely, that I had not gotten out. I had just moved. They had my name. They still had it. And they were going to have it when I was 60 unless I did something. And the only person on earth who could do something was a payroll compliance auditor who had spent 4 years learning exactly, precisely, procedurally how a person proves what hours they worked. If you have ever thought you escaped something and then found it waiting for you on a form, you know, the specific temperature of that moment. I went home. I took the blue notebook out of the closet, where it had sat in a canvas bag for 4.5 years, untouched, unopened. A bag of $1.19 spiral notebooks from a drugstore on Route 9. And I opened the first one, and I started reading my own handwriting from when I was 19 years old. And I want to tell you what I found. But first, I want to tell you what I decided that night. Because it governed everything that came after. I decided I would not do one single thing that was not lawful, correct, and boring. Not one. No confrontation. No relative called. No post written. No secret recording. No document taken from a building I no longer had keys to. Nothing my mother could ever point at and say, "Look what she did to us." I was going to use the same system that had swallowed me, and I was going to use it exactly right. It took me 11 weeks to build the file, and I built it in the order a stranger would need to read it, not in the order I found it. I did it at my kitchen table, at night, on my own laptop, on my own time. I never used 1 minute of my employer's day or 1 page of their letterhead, and I never once looked at anything through a system I had access to for work. That detail is going to matter enormously in about 4 minutes. So, hold on to it. Page 1 was free. I typed my family's company name into the Ohio Secretary of State business search at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and every annual report that company had ever filed came up as a list of links. Public. Westgain Abamsir. No login. 9 years of my life. Sitting behind a search box the entire time. I opened the one filed. The year I turned 24. Officer, listing. President, Patrice Hart. Vice President, Delia Hart. Statutory agent, Delia Hart, which is the person legally designated to receive lawsuits and government notices on behalf of a company. And at the bottom, a signature block with my name typed into it, and the box checked certifying that the person signing is authorized and that the information is true. I am going to call that document the officer page from here on, because we are going to keep coming back to it. There were 5 of them. 5 consecutive years. The first one had been filed 3 years before that letter came to the shop. the one my mother handed back to me and called shorthand. Page 2 cost me $22 and took 9 days to arrive. I wrote to the bank in Columbus. Not a phone call, because a phone call leaves nothing. A written request, sent by certified mail, asking for a complete copy of the file on the account bearing my name and my social security number, which a person is entitled to when they are named on the account. I signed it. I included a copy of my identification. I did it the boring way. 9 days later, a large envelope arrived, and inside it was the personal guarantee, and I sat on the floor of my apartment and looked at my own name in handwriting that was not mine. It was not a good forgery. It was not a bad one, either. It was the signature of somebody who had seen my signature 5,000 times on Invoices and had reproduced it from memory, quickly, in an office, with somebody waiting. I will call that one the guarantee. And here is the detail that broke the entire case open. And it was not a signature comparison, because signature comparison is expensive and arguable and slow. It was a date and a place. The guarantee was executed in person, at a branch office in Columbus, at 11:20 in the morning, on a Thursday in October. The bank's own file recorded the branch, the date, and the time, because banks record those things without being asked. Columbus is 140 miles from that shop, 2 hours and 20 minutes each way, if the highway is clear. Page 3 was in a canvas bag in my closet. I opened the blue notebook to that Thursday in October, and in my own 19-cent handwriting from when I was 24 years old, it said that I unlocked the shop at 5:50 in the morning, and it listed 3 service calls. I ran that day myself, because 2 technicians were out with the flu, and it named the streets: Sycamore, Delaware Avenue, a church on Water Street, with a boiler older than my father, and in the photographs of the corporate folder I had taken on my phone before I walked out, there were the company's own service tickets for that same Thursday, in the company's own numbered sequence. In my handwriting, signed by 3 customers, I could not have been in Columbus at 11:20 in the morning. I was in a church basement on Water Street, with my hand on a boiler. That is what Alma meant. Nobody has ever won an argument with a date. Stay with me, because there is one more piece, and it is the one that turned this from a dispute into something with actual teeth. I filed 2 things, in this order, and the order was the whole strategy. First, an identity theft affidavit with the bank, and with all 3 credit bureaus, which is a sworn statement that an account was opened in your name without your authorization. Sworn means you are legally exposed if you lie, which is exactly why it carries weight. I attached the guarantee, the notebook page, the service tickets, and the branch record. Second, a wage claim with the state, for unpaid wages, for 9 years of work. I knew what their defense would be before they made it. I had spent 4 years reading these files professionally. Their defense would be that I was never an employee, that I was a family member who helped out voluntarily at a family business, that there was no employment relationship, that no wages were ever owed, and that a bag of personal diaries proves nothing. It is a good defense. It usually works. Au geste. So the wage claim required the company to produce its payroll records for the period. Their attorney produced them, because they had to, and the state sent me a copy, because I was the claimant, and I opened that packet at my kitchen table on a Wednesday night in November. The company had carried an employee named Deese hard on its payroll for the last 3 years. I worked there, $460 a week, 156 weeks, $71,760 issued in my name. I never received a dollar of it. I never saw a stub. I never filed a tax return that included it, because I did not know it existed. Sit with that number for a second, because I do not want you doing arithmetic. I want you to feel it. $71,000 is more than every place I lived in those years, plus the car I drove, plus every meal I ate in them, combined. With money left over, I am going to call those the ghost paychecks. And here is why they were fatal to my family. And I need you to see it clearly, because it is the most elegant thing that has ever happened to me. They could not have it both ways. If I was never an employee, then their own payroll records were fraudulent, and somebody had created a fake worker to pull cash out of a corporation and reduce its taxable profit. And that is not a family disagreement. That is a matter for the tax authorities. If I was an employee, then their own payroll records proved I was one, in their own handwriting, filed with their own government. For 3 years, and my 9 years of unpaid hours went from my word against theirs to their word against theirs. Every door out of that room was locked from the inside, and they had locked it themselves. 4 years before I ever thought to knock. I did not have to build a case. I just had to hand somebody the pieces in order. 3 documents. The officer page, the guarantee, the ghost paychecks. Everything else was my $19 notebook, confirming what their own paper already said. The hearing was on a Tuesday in February, in a state office building with brown carpet and a water cooler, in a room with one long table and a hearing officer at the head of it. My mother wore the coat she wore to my father's funeral. Curtis sat next to her in a shirt with a collar, and he looked at the table for most of it. And once early on, he looked at me and mouthed the word please. There was no jury. There was no gallery. There was nobody there to be impressed. I had prepared 5 numbered statements, and I read them, because I had learned 4 years earlier that when you have the documents, you inform. You do not argue. Arguing is what you do when you need them to agree with you. I did not need them to agree with me. 1. From the 9th of September, when I was 19, until the 12th of March, when I was 28, I performed the administrative, dispatch, purchasing, billing, and payroll functions of this company. 50 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, 9 years, 22,500 hours. 2. I received no wages, no stub, and no tax document in that period. The company's own payroll records show it issued $460 a week under my name for the final 3 years. $71,760 in total, none of which reached me. 3. On the 9th of October, at 11:20 in the morning, a personal guarantee bearing my name was executed at a branch office in Columbus. On that date, and at that time I was performing service calls at 3 addresses in our town, documented by the company's own numbered service tickets, signed by 3 customers, all of whom are alive and reachable. 4. 5 consecutive annual reports were filed with the state listing me as vice president and statutory agent. I did not sign any of them, and I did not know of them until 4 years after I left. 5. I am not asking for a relationship. I am asking for the wages, and for my name. My mother asked to respond. The hearing officer allowed it, and she was magnificent. And I mean that. She did not shout. She said that I was her daughter, and that she had raised me alone after my father died, and that the business had fed me and housed me for 28 years, and that a family business is not a factory, and that if we were going to start billing each other for love, she would like to submit an invoice for a childhood. She said, "Family doesn't send invoices." And I said, the only unprepared sentence I said in that room. I said, "Then who cashed the checks with my name on them?" Nobody answered. The hearing officer wrote something down. My mother looked at the table. That was the loudest moment of my entire life, and it was conducted at conversational volume. I did not cry in that room. I want to say that clearly because I had promised myself I would not, and because there is a version of this story where crying would have felt like winning. and it would not have been. Here is what happened afterward, and I am going to give it to you flatly, because flat is how it actually arrived. It arrived in envelopes over 5 months, the way real things do. The state issued a determination in my favor. 9 years of unpaid work, valued at $11 an hour, came to $247,500, plus interest and penalties. A number like that does not mean anything until you translate it. So here it is. Translated, that is more than the house I was trying to buy. Twice over, that is a childhood bedroom and 9 winters, and every phone call at 4 in the morning, priced by a stranger who had never met me, in a building with brown carpet. The bank completed its identity theft investigation. The guarantee was found to have been executed by someone other than me. The charged-off debt was removed from my credit file and reassigned to the individual who signed it. 11 days after that, my credit report came back clean for the first time since I was 24 years old, and I read it standing up in my kitchen, twice, the way you reread a sentence in a language you are still learning. The state tax authority reversed my responsible party designation, which meant the $81,000 of unpaid tax stopped being mine at the same moment. It became entirely somebody else's. And then there was the fourth thing, which I did not ask for and did not engineer, and which I will not pretend I was sorry about. A wage determination against a company is a public record. So, is a finding that a company carried a person on payroll who never received the money. The heating and cooling business in our county runs on public work, and public work requires a surety bond, which is the guarantee an insurance company sells a contractor, promising the school district that the job will get finished and paid for. The bonding company read the file. They declined to renew. The school district contract was roughly 60% of that company's revenue, and it went out to bid that summer. And it went to a competitor 2 towns over whose owner had worked for my father in the 1990s. I did not do that. I want to be precise. Even now, I filed a wage claim and a sworn statement, both truthful, both mine to file, and every consequence after that was somebody in an office, reading what my family had already written down about themselves. Then came the part nobody warns you about, which is that after you win, they come back. My mother called 41 times in 6 weeks. I know the number because my phone keeps a list, and because I am a person who keeps lists, which is the entire reason any of this happened. She left voicemails. I listened to all of them. Once, at night, standing at a window, there was not one apology in any of them. I want to be exact about this, because I know some of you are still waiting on one from somebody. There was never a version of the sentence, I did something to you. There was concern. She was concerned about me. She was concerned about what this was doing to me, about who was advising me, about the kind of person I was turning into out there. She said the word concerned 11 times across 6 weeks, and every single time, it was aimed, like a hand on a bat. Curtis came to my building. He waited in the lobby on a Saturday morning because he did not have my apartment number. And when I came down, he stood up and said he had not known. And I believe he half did not. And I told him something that I think was the truest thing I have ever said to my brother. I said, Curtis, you cashed a check every week for 3 years with my name printed on it. You may not have known, but you never once asked. He cried. I did not. I want to be honest that it was not hard not to, and that scared me a little. There was a group message with cousins and an aunt. There was a woman from our church who wrote me a long letter about forgiveness that used the word chose 4 times. As in, this is the family you were chosen for. There was a rumor in town that I had sued my widowed mother out of her business, which is not what happened, and which I have never corrected, and which I am not going to correct now. I answered all of it with silence, except once. My mother's last voicemail, the one after which she stopped calling, said that I had taken everything from her, and that all she had ever asked me for was loyalty, and that she hoped was worth it. I sent one text message back. It said, "I sent you an invoice. The state signed it. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this, and you have been told that setting a number on your own time is a betrayal, comment invoice below." I read them. I read all of them. Here is what I did not get, and I want to be honest with you, because I have watched too many of these stories end with a hug that never happened. I did not get my mother back. There was no scene in a hospital, no letter at the end of her life, no moment where she understood. I do not expect one. She is 71, and she runs a smaller version of the same company out of a smaller building with 2 technicians. And by every account, she is still very good with customers. And she still tells people the story of the daughter who turned on her. And in that story, she is not lying, because she believes it entirely. I did not get the years. 22,500 hours came back to me as money. And money is not hours. And anybody who tells you otherwise has never done the trade. What I got was smaller, and I would not give it back for anything. I got my name on a credit report, and on a mortgage, and on a mailbox. I got the house with the leaning garage and the maple tree, and I paid for it with the wages, and I sit on the porch in the fall, and it is unbelievably boring, and I love it. And I got one thread out of that family, which I did not earn and did not deserve. Curtis has a daughter, June. She was 8 when I left, and she is 15 now. And about a year after the hearing, she found me on her own, without her grandmother's knowledge, and sent me a message asking if it was true that I used to run the shop. I said, yes. She said, nobody ever tells that part. We write now, not often, and not about any of it. She sent me a photograph in the spring of a spiral notebook she had started keeping for her weekend job at a garden center. Hours in one column, dates in the other, in handwriting that looks unnervingly like mine at that age. She wrote, "Is this how you did it?" I wrote back, "That is exactly how I did it. Don't let anybody tell you. It is just a hobby. One more thing, and then I will let you go." When the company sold the old building 3 years ago, they auctioned the contents: compressors, a parts rack, 3 desks, a copier I fought with for 9 years. I drove up. I stood in the back with a paper number in my hand, in a coat that was not my father's, and I bought exactly one item: the punch clock, gray metal, about the size of a bread box, still bolted to a section of the wall they had cut out to remove it. $11. It is in my hallway. It does not work, and I have never had it repaired. For 9 years that clock hung 4 feet from where I stood every morning, and there was never a card in that rack with my name on it, because I was not staff. I was family. I would how. That is what the clock meant when I was 24, and it meant that some hours count and some hours are just love, and that a person can be too important to a building to be recorded in it. Here is what it means now. The rack is empty. Every card is gone. And the only record that survived that building, the only proof that 22,500 hours of a human life ever happened in it, is a stack of $4.19 spiral notebooks from a drugstore on Route 9, which a 19-year-old girl started keeping because she needed one column of numbers. That was true. I thought I was keeping a diary. Turns out, I was keeping the receipt. If this reached you, and you are the one in your family who answers the phone, who covers it, who gets told there is no invoice between people who love each other, then, hear the only advice I have. Write down your hours. Not as a weapon. Not because you are planning anything. Write them down because they are real. And because a day you did not record is a day somebody else gets to describe for you. They can argue with you all day long. Nobody has ever won an argument with a date.